Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. Adam, Dave, and Jamey here. I want to thank Heath Cummings for that chat in our previous segment. Now, I encourage everyone to do some mock drafts before you do your actual draft. This is really the best way to figure out who you really like, who you want to take, which builds make the most sense for you. And it's a very helpful exercise. And we've done a lot of mock drafts. We've also done a lot of real drafts, and that's even better to really figure out who you like and who you want on your team. So I'm going to ask you guys for your draft takeaways. This segment is going to be Dave's big draft takeaways. Dave, from what we've done in recent days and weeks, you are on the clock. What are some of your draft takeaways?
All right, the very first one, you really need to get an idea of how you feel about wide receivers in this year's drafts. So look at the list. You can look at my rankings, Jamey's rankings, Heath's rankings, and see for yourself just how many of them do you really love? How many of them are guys that you think can average 17, 18 PPR points per game? How many of them can get close to what Jamar Chase did last year? And when I look at my rankings, I only count 9 names of wide receivers who I think can get well past 17 PPR points per game. And I want to get those guys on my team. So the goal is to try and get at least one of them in every single draft that I'm in. Now, if your number's a little bit longer, could be 10, could be 12, could be 15, that's great. You can wait until round 2, maybe even the early round 3 to get one of those wide receivers. But I think it's important to try and get at least one of those stud wide receivers.
So let me ask you, just because if you're picking early in the first round and you take Robinson or Gibbs or McCaffrey or Barkley, whoever the case may be, you're probably not getting one of those guys.
It's going to be a lot harder to get one of those guys coming back to you in round 2, so you have to feel good about where you're at on that next tier of wide receivers. And I don't think it's a particularly big tier. I think Drake London is in that tier. I think T. Higgins is in that tier. Ladd McConkey might be in that tier. Jackson Smith and Jigba in full PPR, he might be in that tier. Maybe if I squint real hard, Mike Evans is in that tier. But it's really not a lot of names. All the more reason to go after one of those first 9. The one exception that I will make, though, and this is to your point, when I get one of those stud running backs that can get me 20 PPR points per game, I'm going to gravitate toward them first.
Yeah, you're not getting Drake London anywhere near the back end of round 2. There's no chance.
That's fine. Then I'll have to settle for somebody else. Or if I take a running back in round 1, I'm not opposed to taking a running back in round 2. I don't want to force it with a wide receiver that I'm not in love with in round 2. So if I start my draft with 2 running backs, yeah, my receivers aren't going to be great, but they might not have been great anyway if I take a running back in round 1.
All right, give me your quarterback takeaway, Dave.
I don't think it's right to reach for any quarterback under any circumstance, whether we're talking a 1-quarterback league, Superflex league, 2QB league, and obviously those quarterbacks are going to get pushed up in a Superflex or a 2QB league. But I think you should have the goal of having fair value when you draft a quarterback in fantasy this year. What does that mean to me? It means no quarterbacks in the first round and no quarterbacks in the second round in a typical 10 or 12 team fantasy football league. When I get to round 3, if I see one of my favorite quarterbacks there, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, yeah, I'm going to go after them. I think that that's a fair value. Round 4, I think, is a fair value for Joe Burrow or Jalen Hurts. I think round 6 is actually a really good value for Patrick Mahomes, and maybe even round 8 for Baker Mayfield. Now, if you heard all those values that I just spewed out and you said, I'm never getting a quarterback at any of those points, don't freak out and don't reach for them either, because there are so many quarterbacks that are start-worthy in fantasy that you can just wait until the double-digit rounds and pick off one of Bo Nix, Dak Prescott. Jared Goff is one of my favorites. Drake May is one of our favorite breakout candidates. Any of those quarterbacks are available all the way through into the double-digit rounds. You don't have to panic, and you certainly don't have to reach for a quarterback.
In our drafts, you're right. You're not getting Bo Nix in double-digit rounds. You're not getting Dak Prescott. Just the average draft position tells us those guys aren't there. One thing that I would sort of push back on, and I don't think you have to do this, but in a 10-team league, you want to separate yourself as much as possible. And any of those 5 quarterbacks give you such a significant edge. It's not a horrible idea, as much as I like to wait on quarterbacks, to take one of those guys in the second round. So if you want to make sure you guarantee yourself, if you want Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen, if you want Jaden Daniels or Joe Burrow or Jalen Hurts, it's not bad in a 10-team league to reach those guys, especially if it's a 10-team league that starts 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers. To get one of those guys at a premium price in a 10-team league, I think it's actually okay.
Okay. Dave, you used to be Mr. Running Back. Things have changed a little bit for you.
Well, I still would be. We just got done talking about what I would do if I was picking early in round 1. And I got Bijan Robinson or Jahmyr Gibbs in round 2's there, and there isn't a wide receiver I like. Yeah, I would take running backs early, but I like the running back depth this year. So I'm a little more okay waiting for running backs now than I would have been, say, 3, 4, 5 years ago, because I think the running back position is deep. There's a lot of great rookie running backs that are in this draft class. They're going to end up going pretty early, but that pushes down some of the old heads at the position that I think are still good for fantasy. Alvin Kamara, I think, is still very good. I think James Conner is still very good. There's some other ones that you can find even later. We talked about Austin Eckler as a round 9 pick. I'm okay with him, not necessarily being a starter, but on my bench to begin the season, I'm fine with that. I think that position is deeper than normal. You don't have to take advantage of it if you don't want to, and you can certainly target your favorites at the position. But I don't think you should have to feel like you have to reach for that spot either. And starting with a hero RB approach, which is taking one running back with your first 5 picks, I like that approach a lot this year because of the depth of the position.
I'm going to have something different, slightly different in a little bit later, but I do think just where I sort of see the depth at the positions. Dave's right. The running back is deeper. There's about 25 like really good running backs, number 1, number 2 options, and there's about 40 good wide receivers that could be number 2 wide receivers once you get past. Dave said 9 guys. For me, there's 10 because Drake London absolutely belongs in that group. So when you look at the top 10 wide receivers and then you look at the top 25 or so running backs, I almost think it's in your best interest to sort of take a skewed or an alternative hero RB approach to take 2 running backs in the first 5 rounds. I'll get more into that a little bit later because the receivers that you're finding in rounds 5 through 7, essentially, now that we have Ibuka in that range and Ricky Pearsall in that range, just guys that have sort of emerged that could make that group, that blob that we talk about a lot, even better. It's almost you're going to get such great wide receiver value rounds 5, 6, and 7 to get a running back in your first 5, to get 2 running backs in your first 5 rounds. I think is a good way to go.
Yeah, because if you're sitting out rounds 5, 6, and 7 at running back, I don't think you're going to want your RB2 to be in round 8 or later. That's going to be a little bit risky there.
Right, I don't want Austin Eckler to be my number 2 running back. Dave said it. You want him to be a reserve. Like I don't want to have to depend on, as much as I love Zach Charbonnet and Jordan Mason and those guys. Like I want them to be, at best, my number 3 running back.
All right, Dave, you talked about not reaching at quarterback. What about a tight end?
Yeah, I don't think you should do that either. An average draft position reflects that that's not really happening that often in fantasy drafts. For example, Brock Bowers is the top tight end off the draft board pretty much in every single fantasy football draft. On CBS, his average draft position is right at the 1-2 or the 2-3 turn, so about 25th overall is where he's going. I don't have a problem with that, but there might be somebody in every single fantasy draft that gets a little bit more excited about Brock Bowers, and they'll take him at 15. They'll take him at 18. And I think if you reach at the tight end position, I think you're going to lose out. And I think that especially goes double for Travis Kelce, whose average draft position on CBS is right around the 5-6 turn. I wouldn't take him until round 7 at the earliest. But there is an exception. There's a tight end rookie that I really love in Indianapolis named Tyler Warren. Been talking about him for a long time. I think he's worth an 8th round pick. I'm trying to get him in round 8 in every single draft that I'm in because I love his upside. I think being in Indianapolis, even though he's catching passes from Daniel Jones, I actually think that's perfect for him because Daniel Jones isn't a gunslinger who's going to throw it downfield all the time. This is a reasonably smart and safe player that Daniel Jones can throw to and maybe even lead the team leader in Indianapolis in targets, catches, yards, and receiving touchdowns this year. So I will make an exception for Tyler Warren, but in general, when it comes to the tight end position, do yourself a favor. Don't reach for that position either.
Yeah, Warren, I just obviously wish we were on a different team because Daniel Jones is not a touchdown thrower, and I'm worried about that with Warren. But Darren Waller, his last season with the Giants, 2023, he was actually on pace for 111 targets. So, look, they didn't have neighbors then. They didn't have a Pittman or a Downs, stuff like that. But I did think that was something to point out. He wasn't that bad for Darren Waller. Waller, unfortunately, was only on pace for 2 touchdowns, but 79 catches, 847 yards, 2 touchdowns on 111 targets. You'd like to think that if Warren were on pace for 111 targets, he'd do more with it than that. He probably would. So, yeah, Jones has a history of throwing to short area targets, as you were saying.
Mm-hmm. You got to sort of look at the position and say, we say great or late. Like, the top 3 guys are in a different stratosphere at this point. When you look at Bowers and McBride and Kittle, like, those guys should go in the first 3 rounds, understandably so, whether it's the late round 2 for the start of Bowers and McBride, middle of round 3 to the end of round 3 for Kittle. Like, they're just exceptional and in great spots right now. Once you get past those guys, you got to ask yourself, because those are probably 15 to 18 points per game if things go right for them, especially based on last year. Those 3 guys were 15 points per game or more. Who can be 12 to 14 points? And that's where Njoku and Laporta and Kelsey and Ingram and maybe Andrews comes into play. I might be missing somebody out. Hawkinson come into play. And that's the sort of the ceiling. Maybe Warren gets to there, but I think Warren is more in the next group of guys of who can be north of 10. Get me 10 to 12. And I think that's safe for Warren. I think it's safe for potentially, that's where I would prefer Ingram and Andrews. I think it's safe for potentially Kincaid and Ferguson and Goddard and
how many names is this?
That's
a lot of names.
That's the thing. It's. I know we always say this is the year of tight ends, and I don't want to put that out there because it's never comes to fruition. But there are a good amount of guys that can get you north of 10 points, and 10 points has kind of been the barometer of a top 12 tight end. And I think that's kind of where it is. Like, if you don't love the value for Kelsey or Andrews or Njoku or Laporta, that kind of middle tier guys, Hawkinson as well, like, you maybe wait and be aggressive with Warren if you believe in him as much as Dave. That should, Tucker Kraft as well. A couple guys that are breakout candidates.
Yep.
So it's just, I would always just look at it and say, play the board. Don't, if you get past I'll talk about tight end in a second where I think the format matters. But if you're just looking at the position, like, play the board. Don't reach for those middle tier tight ends. There are a lot of great late round options. Like we just did this draft. I'm very happy with the combination of Kincaid and Ferguson. One of those guys will be 10 plus points. One will hopefully be 12 points, which will be a steal with my two last picks.
All right, well, we're going to get more of Jamey's draft reactions, draft takeaways after this. Thank you, Dave. Good stuff on one for each position. Really helpful stuff to go into our drafts. We'll be right back with Jamey's draft takeaways after this.